technology for you. All right, and we'll just let that run for a quick second, and we will get started. Mhm. Welcome, everybody, to West Virginia Uncommon Place. This is a very, very special episode. When I do show, I look at the guest, however the guest comes to me, if it comes from the great place of Pod Match or if it comes from me from any other place. I look at the guest and I have to gauge. And when I gauge a guest, it's like this. I look at the topic of the guest, who they are, what they mean to the world. And then when I get the meaning of what they mean to the world, then I can give a response back. Sometimes it takes me 30 seconds because I have a mind that just rolls like that. Other times I have to go beyond myself. I say, hey, what do you think of this? And this guest that I have one coming on today, she has a pen name that goes along with her being a author. If I'm correct on it being a pen name, but her name is Michelle Torrey, but she goes by M.E. Torrey, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And she is on the show today to talk about a book in particular called Fox Creek, correct?
Yes.
And Fox Creek, from your perspective, before we even get started, is interesting to me. And the reason why I wanted to have this on here is because our society right now, in my personal opinion, and I'm 40 years old, I'm born 1985. So I'm from that generation right before, the computers and everything took off. But I'm from the end of one part of our world to another part. And that part was in the 80s into the mid 90s. Those, to me, from 19, probably even before that, but we'll just say 1980 till about 2000, that was the full force integration of black and white people. I understand segregation and I understand what people say about their generation, but for my generation, I actually grew up in a generation where color did not stop me from doing something. Every education that was granted to me and given to me wasn't given to me because of my color. It was given to me by how hard I worked in school and things that, went on 30 years prior to me going to school that paved the way. So your book and everything that goes along with that, it tickles my fancy and it gets me very interested because the life that I know is not the life that happened literally 30 years before I was born or 50 years before I was born or at the beginning of your lifetime because your beginning of your lifetime you've seen or even heard or felt or knew what it was like to actually be judged by your race, by your sex. And I
Mhm.
mean, still our sex and everything still judged. But the focal point for me is that your perspective means so much to me for the simple fact you've seen it, you witnessed it, you were part of it. So, Miss Tori, real quick, if you don't mind, please tell us about your humble beginnings.
Okay. So I was a child in the 60s and the civil rights era during that time, the integration of schools and so on. I saw a lot of that on TV, the black and white grainy images and so on, and saw the struggles, the hatred, the riots, saw the Kent State thing. I mean, it was just the assassinations of JFK, RFK, MLK. It was a time of great social upheaval, and rightly so. Um, I was fortunate in that I belonged to a family that when we would see sometimes these disturbing images on TV, we would sit down as a family and discuss what was happening. And at the root of all of our family discussion was the understanding that all people are created equal. Um, are they treated equally? No. And that's what these civil rights, what the movement was about. But I was so fortunate to be able to be a part of these discussions and to have parents that led me through that. Then I'll fast forward. When I was in junior high and high school, I was fortunate enough to live in Europe. My father was a teacher and administrator in the military school, so I went to military school. And anyone who's been to like a military school, especially in Europe as part of the Seventh Army, knows that race was much less of a factor there as it was in the United States. In fact, and I know I'm naive as I say this, but I didn't know that race racism was still a problem because I was so shielded from it in those military environments. We had black and white students always playing together on the same teams, cheerleaders, you name it. We were integrated. And even today, our Facebook community from these schools, not that we all agree, but we still have conversations all together. And then I came back to the United States, and it was a slow realization that it was still a problem. And I didn't know if it had just never gone away. Of course, I know now, of course, it hadn't gone away. I was in a bubble. So then I went to, this would have been in the 90s. I went to visit plantations in Louisiana. I was at that time a writer of children's books. I was working for Random House and for Penguin. Um, and my husband was going to go to New Orleans, and I had never been. And I thought, oh, what a great opportunity. I will base a book there and then write off the trip. So I went to New Orleans and I was going to write a ghost story, in the city. I thought, I love spooky stories. Let's do that. And while I was there, I thought, I want to see some of these plantations because I've never seen them. And so I rented a car and I went north. And then when I was in the tours of these plantations, multiple different plantations, they were always given by white docents dressed sometimes like Scarlett O'Hara, and they would give the history of the white family that lived in the big house, and not once were the slaves mentioned. And I was flabbergasted by that. And they still called it the War of Northern Aggression. And I just I felt like I was in a time warp. It was just so odd. And I was infuriated at the same time. And I went back home. I live in Washington State, and I did at that time. I went back home just on fire. I am like, no, that's a whitewashed history that's being told. And that's a history that can't be told any longer. And so I'm going to write a narrative, Fox Creek, which crosses the white narrative with that slave narrative, and we're going to see what happens. And so that's how I started that. And I did 3 years of full-time research before beginning even the first sentence.
And I thank you for that because the disparity and that word disparity, I know it's at least in the last 5 years, I've heard people use the word disparity so much. That has always been an issue because I can tell you something a little deeper than that. I live in West Virginia, but I was born and raised in Lynchburg, Virginia,
Mhm.
where I'm from. In the early time, that was a penal colony.
Yeah.
And, if you were in Jamestown and something happened, or if you just came over in district servant and something was crazy, you went to Lynchburg, they decided where you're going. And a lot of times that's how, and I know you probably learned or researched and got an idea of this, that Southwest exploration, a lot of times were the prisoners, the slaves, and all them that eventually got out there. And then somebody with money, probably around Louisiana Purchase time, you know, went a little bit deeper. But the one thing that I always noticed when you go to the northern part of the South, and we put a little divide, us northern Southerners to the South Southerners, I know that's a lot. Right in South Carolina. What went on in Mississippi and Louisiana because of how those people were broken down into mulattoes and Creole and they were truly broken down to their rawest form. Like, I always wondered about the education. I always wondered about the things that went on down there compared to up north, because in Virginia, yeah, we grew cotton, different things like that. We're tobacco city all day long, or places. But down there, you had sugarcane, different, so much more crops that were taken care of. And it was a certain type of hierarchy that you find in Louisiana and Mississippi that were intriguing to me. So, what I would like to know from you in writing that, what like, what was the first tense moment for you when you were writing this book? Because obviously you told us when you went to visit these places, you got infuriated. You saw an injustice. And I thank you once again for taking care of that injustice and helping that narrative. But after that point, what inside of your writing like kind of just, kind of made you like cringe for a second? What was it about your writing that hurt you? I guess that's the best question.
Okay. So that's an excellent question. Very hard to answer. But I think for me, researching the white narrative, like journals, diaries, letters
Hmm.
of plantation owners, slave owners, was very different than researching that of the slave. Reason being is it was illegal for slaves to learn how to read and write. So the only narrative you're going to get from a person who was actually a slave is either the slaves who've escaped or who somehow secretly learned how to read and write and then wrote about whatever it was. And we have quite a few examples of those, but those were not the common experience. The common experience was you're born on a plantation and then you die on a plantation. It may or may not be the same one. That's the common experience. We got lucky in that in the during the Depression years, the FDR government started something called the Writers Project and to help put some writers into work. And they went down to places like Louisiana and they started interviewing ex-slaves. What was life like? What was your master like? What did you eat? Those kinds of things. And you have just this gamut of stories from life was so cruel you can't even imagine to, oh, everything was wonderful. And so you have everything in between. But there's a problem with those interviews as well, in that, these interviews were conducted in the 1930s. So these slaves would have only been children during the Civil War. These people who were giving the interviews. And so again, that's a skewed sampling. So I had to read between the lines, especially with the slave narratives. What struck me the most and what was my stab in the heart moment was two white narratives that I read. One was called Secret and Sacred, the Diaries of James Henry Hammond, and he was actually governor of South Carolina from I think 1850 to 1852, only for 2 years, and he had to resign in disgrace. But he wrote in his diary after he had abused all of these people, and I read it and I thought he was a deplorable human being, but he didn't see it that way, and he's at the height of white patriarchy, right? um, the height of power. And so he's writing the diary as if the world owes him something. Um, and he is very ill at the time he's writing this diary, and no one has come to help him. The servants that he has in his home won't even open the door and come in and change his bedding and so on. And he believes himself misused, mistreated because, as he put it, I have never, to my knowledge, done any wrong to any human being in my life.
Whoa.
And I was blown away by that because the diary is replete with his abuses. He raped 13, 14-year-old girls, both his nieces and, the slaves that were under him. And that's why he had to resign. But he never took responsibility for those cruelties, any of it. And so that blew me away, just that white privileged perspective of I haven't done anybody wrong. And then the same thing with another diary written by Bennett Barrow down in Louisiana. He asked his wife, have I ever wronged anybody in my life? And she looks at him and she says, no, I don't believe you have. And yet, throughout his plantation journal, he talks about, I had to whip, this entire gang over here. And, I let the dogs overhaul this person there because he keeps running away. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. So there's this blindness, and I wanted that blindness to come through in my book. So these are people that if you met them today, you might like them. They tell jokes, they're the center of attention, they're likable enough to get elected to office, they do their civic duty, they love their families, and on and on and on. You go, oh, that guy's a really nice guy. And then, yet, in their time, society condoned, at least in the sense of Bennett Barrow, they condoned what he was doing to keep his slaves in line. And so there's this blindness there of what I was doing there. That doesn't count as far as me being a good person. I'm a good person because I take care of my neighbor's field when they're sick, or I repair ditches for the county. I go and vote. I'm kind to my children. So I had to, you know, walk that very, very interesting line, but it also tore me up inside. It was just an amazing revelation for me, really.
And I can get that because that's just like ordinary people justifying extraordinary harm.
Absolutely.
And I know that has to like it had to grip you a little bit because even thinking about, like you said, someone what they're doing on their plantation and then going doing their public office, I could really see that, like, you know, basically the enslavers. I could just see them, I'm your enslaver. I'm the person that handles business on this area. You're my property. And that property context is something that even today I couldn't fathom because even a horse or even an animal, we're kindred to them to a degree. You know, they have we treat them with respect in the sense that they have emotions, feelings, mental capabilities, just like anxiety and stress. So I could see where that would bother you. Now, with your research, you looked at plantation records, slave narrative, and obviously you just spoke about the personal diaries. Um, can you tell us about the antebellum South and how that particular discovery changed you?
Well, I think for me, just the rhythm of life there was so different, and the history which they had inherited from the people, the generations that came before them. We don't have that here in Washington State. We were a new frontier. We really weren't developed until long after the Civil War. So, to go there and find a place that's been steeped in that history, and they're very proud of that history. And to some degree, I do understand that. I don't understand not owning up to the abuses that occurred, but I do understand the pride in it. It's beautiful. Um, but what also stuck out to me was even when I was there most recently, I didn't really see whites mixing with blacks and blacks mixing with whites. I still saw the divisions. And when I was in St. Francisville, and that's where St. Francisville, Louisiana, that's really where my book is based, outside of it, of course, on a
Okay.
plantation. But I fictionalize it and I call it St. Marysville, because I don't want anybody saying, hey, um, but all the white people live in these big stately homes along the main street, very, very beautiful homes. And then if you drive a little bit, you look behind the homes and there's a shanty town filled with black people and very crowded. And the kids are playing in the dirt. And the contrast is just, for me, it was just mind blowing. I could hardly take it in. So, yeah.
And that's something, and I can agree with you on that too. One thing that I noticed, like Stacy and I, we were in Alabama and Birmingham 6 months ago. Her and I, we follow sports, and I'm going to tie in sports in just a second. But we went to see all the stuff that went on in Birmingham, and how like you said, that shanty town, how Birmingham was built up in one area, then 10 miles outside of that city, that's where all of your, basically your lower class, because it could have been black or white there, lived. So I get what you're saying there, and I know that because after visiting and seeing a lot more stuff and going deeper into the history of it all, like it's just something that's weird. And even to this day, and this is really harsh on me to say this, in that area in the South, the divide to me comes in when you talk about college sports, football and basketball in particular. I noticed that in those impoverished areas, if there's an athlete, that athlete gets sucked up out of the system early, taken from whatever province or parish that he was from, and
Mm,
he gets put somewhere to make something of himself. And it's odd that how people are so subjective to that now. Oh, we're just sending them to a charter school. We're doing this or that. It still goes on, and that to me, that's a blanketed racism that we don't even talk about. But like you said, I noticed that if it's an athlete in the South, not just saying Alabama, Louisiana, or Mississippi, but anywhere, and they're of color, they're going to get moved around and put in the right place to take care of them. And academically wise, in academia, they do not care.
mm.
And always, when I talk to different youth and different people, even in West Virginia, different places, I always tell them this one thing: education and athletics go hand in hand if that's what you want to do. But your academia has to come first. And like you were saying earlier about the differences, growing up where I grew up, I'm from middle class Virginia, but I'm from the lower middle class. We were the first people to, and I'm saying in 1985, we were the first people to live in a suburb, like a subdivision of black and white people that Jerry Falwell, and no harsh feeling towards him or anything, that he helped get developed because he mingled the races, and I'll say that. So, in time back to what you were talking about, it was certain things that we avoided, certain type of conversations we avoided. But in Fox Creek, you asked the listeners, I mean the readers, and they're listening in their head, to understand America's story, the ones they avoid. But my question to you is, what conversations do you want the book to force people to stop postponing?
Right. Oh, that's the best question ever. So I was very careful in writing Fox Creek that I did not put author judgment on any of my characters. I just wrote the characters, and you would be hard pressed to know did the author like this character or not? Because I really want the reader to be able to go, okay, there's a lot of gray area here. I'm sympathetic in certain ways, but in other ways, it's horrifying. And that's when things get really interesting because, like you said, ordinary people doing extraordinary harm, okay, and what my race, my white race, has to do is own the history back then in terms of not whitewashing it, but owning what happened. And instead of owning it with a sense of guilt or a sense of um, even defensiveness, we need to just have the conversations and just I think white people need to reach out to Black people and vice versa. And we need to have the conversations without the guilt, without the rage, without the defensiveness, because unless we do, mistakes are going to continue to be repeated. White people, especially, and myself included, we have to see ourselves in the characters of the white slave owners. I think white people do an injustice when they say, I would never have owned a slave, because they were ordinary people. And horrific things are happening even today and being mainstreamed today by people because society says it's okay. When we identify ourselves with a slave owner and said, that could have been me, but for the grace of God, then we're seeing ourselves more clearly. And that enables us then to see what's happening around us in the world more clearly and to take responsibility for what's happening, for the injustices that are happening.
And I agree with that too, because in my instance, being obviously where where I live now, 1.5 million people, and 90% of that's white. I hear that more often. They give the excuse of this, oh, it happened back then, that wasn't us. But I always, in the back of my head, I don't say it to them. I have this thing, but it's in your lineage.
Mhm.
Okay.
Like
And like you said, I don't want them, I never want a person, black or white or anybody, to account that, and I don't want to push them and say, hey, you were a slave owner or this and that. But I'll be like, your forefathers were slave owners. So take this into consideration. It's not in your DNA. I will never say that because that's disrespectful to anyone. But by circumstance, they were slave owners. By choice, they were slave owners. It's part of your history. You should learn it. And like you said, not, and I put a little twist on this, the accountability for it is in the past. But the responsibility of knowing the history and letting people know the history is that person.
mm,
And I wholeheartedly agree with people on that because I tell people, I'm like, hey, a lot of people, that have come over here, descendants of different things, by the time they got to where you're from, and like you said, Washington State, man, that's new frontier. The only racism you probably had out there was Asian, white, and black against each other, or Hispanic and all that. It was a whole melting pot in
mm,
the West, gold rush and everything else. But that North and South hatred, like that's something I can't even tell you today. The Mason Dixon line runs through West Virginia. We're the North South South North, and tying everything back to your book. I do have a few questions because I do pay homage to a series we used to do called Author Circle. I want to know what literary devices did you have to instill in this book to produce this book? And I'm going to tie it back to what I was just saying in a moment. What literary devices did you have to use? Like, obviously, imagery, personification, and all that. But what did you have to use more heavily than you've ever done in your life to make this book that's a literary device?
mm. Ugh. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. I guess, okay. So the writing that this is my first book for an adult audience.
Okay.
But I've written novels that were pretty hard edged for young adult audiences. Um, the difference in this book was I had to leave what I would call a lot of silence in the book. So I'm not going to fill in all the blanks for people in terms of what a character is thinking or feeling. I'm going to leave this space, and that space the reader fills. And I think that silence, especially when you get to the Black women, the Black slaves that are in this book, that those silences become very powerful. And in a sense, it's those silences that they use to have small ways that they stand up for themselves.
Okay. All right. Now, my next question is when you wrote this book, everybody gets a writer's block. And some people say that they didn't get a writer's block, but you have a moment in the book that you paused. You had to just stop what you were doing because the emotional toll and the mental toll on you kind of got to you. Was there a point inside this book that this happened, or did it happen after you released the book?
Uh, I, while I feel all of the emotions deeply in my book as I write, no matter which character I'm writing, whose viewpoint I'm in, I feel those emotions deeply, deeply, deeply. I'm nevertheless kind of ironclad when it comes to the ability to be able to write really tough scenes. And I'm
Okay.
fortunate in that regard because there are plenty of tough scenes. I think the one scene, I don't want to give anything away, but the one scene that was very difficult was a scene of sexual abuse. And that one
Okay.
was super difficult for me to write.
Understandable. And
Yeah.
we can go deep into that, or we can just leave it right here at that. We'll leave it
Yeah.
right here at that because we know exactly what that entails. Now, the next thing that I want to do real quick is we pay homage to my podcast in this one sense. We do this thing called the shameless plug. Would you please tell everyone Torrey, where they can meet you and greet you across the internet and where they can buy your books?
Absolutely. So my website is metorrey, that's TORREY.com. And you can read more about me there and read about the book. It's won a number of awards and is has got a starred review from Kirkus and so on. So it's critically acclaimed. Um, you can buy it from the usual suspects like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but I would encourage you to go to bookshop.org, which is how you would support your local bookstore. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing that happens when authors publish their books, and they forget about this because it's something we learned in elementary school. If you go to your state capital library, and we'll just use West Virginia, for instance, I can go to Charleston. After I purchase this amazing book, I can take the ISBN and request a book in the state capital. In the great state of West Virginia, we have 55 counties. They will order that book for all 55 counties. They will get one copy. And I know that may not pay her bills or anything like that, but it does one thing. It immortalizes her book and it puts her book in placement that a person that may not be able to afford to buy a book can get the book.
Right.
At the same time, it keeps it in a library. In 55 counties in West Virginia, we have over 110 libraries. So I always encourage people to do that one thing because that's the one thing we learned in school that everybody forgot about. And I just want you all to do that. Now, here's the next thing that you can do. The amazing thing about a podcast is a podcast has show notes. The show notes, I will definitely put all active links and ways to meet and greet Miss Tori across the internet. Now, this show, we love news magazines. Growing up, I watched one. It was a great one. It had John Stossel. It had
Oh,
Diane Sawyer. It had Elizabeth Vargas later on, but it had an amazing lady on there. Her name, she's the late great Barbara Walters. So, Miss Tori, are you ready for your 2020 question?
sure.
All right. Here's a fun one. Now, John Stossel, he was a comedic person, but one thing that he always talked about at some point was something about a grandparent. So, one thing I would like to know is what did a grandparent instill in you that you didn't get from your parents?
Oh, oh. Well, I had middle child syndrome
Oh,
as a middle child, and sometimes I felt very lost in the shuffle there. And so my grandmother June, she saw me. She saw me.
okay. Now, I'm going to tell you something right there. Now, this is a cool thing about the John Stossel question. It did two things for you. There was an urgency of a smile. Your smile picked up because you pulled memories. You got a little sad there in between that, but overall, it's a general great expression because you had thought about her, but you hadn't put any thought to light in a long time. So that's your John Stossel question. So I'm glad you got that, and now the memories are going to keep pouring out, right?
Oh yes, she's
Okay,
with me.
right. Now here's your Diane Sawyer question, and this one's a good one because she was very poignant. I thought she was a better interviewer out of all of them, in my personal opinion. Okay, you seen you seen what's going on in the world. If you could take a moment and pause the world and you could get on a center stage. Let's do one that I like. I like people to go to Carnegie. I like people to go to Pittsburgh. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a beautiful place. Not a good football team, but a good, nice place. Um, if we had you at Carnegie, or let's see, let's go West Coast. Let me ping. Out your way, we have you in. They're gonna say Seattle. I'm gonna say we're gonna have you in Fort Washington, just because my wife likes Twilight. So you're on a stage right now, and you're going to present us your book, obviously. Well, what would be the outline of your message to us today that we can take from the past into the present and a lesson learned and a mistake given? Go ahead.
All right. I think the lesson that we bring from the past is a lesson of forgiveness. We must forgive one another. We must forgive ourselves. And in that forgiveness, hearts are opened. It's difficult to forgive ourselves or somebody else if your heart is closed. So the heart opens, forgiveness happens. And when that forgiveness happens, what you feel is a deep love for one another. And I think the lesson that I learn is to love one another. And that may sound corny to a lot of people, but this world will not get healed without being kind and loving one another. The mistake would be thinking it's all about us.
Okay, and I like that. I like that. And right there, that's your next engagement right there, public speaker. We need you to tour the country because you did a great job right there. Now, Barbara Walters. The first question, if I could just put on a costume and be here for a moment, would be I need to know this, Miss Torrey. Success. How do you measure it? How do you equate it? And how do you divide it?
How do I divide it?
Yes, ma'am. How do you divide success? And I'll go into deeper detail after I get your answer.
Okay. I would have answered this question very differently when I was writing for children, because at that time I had a 20-year career, did it every day, sometimes, 60 hours a week, and I traveled everywhere. At that time, for me, success was equated to how well my books sold and how much, was in my bank account. I don't equate sex. I don't equate success that way anymore. Success to me now has nothing to do with money. Success for me now has to do with happiness. It has to do with the connection in my heart and the relationships that I have, not only with God, but with my family, with my community, and with the world at large. And I believe that this book is one of the ways in which I reach out into that community and into the lives of other people that I may never meet, may never know, and yet tell them about their worth as people and that they are worthy.
All right. Now, how do you divide your success?
I don't understand your question.
Okay. So let me give you an example. When we're successful, we exude, and exuding something is a division. We take that success, we divide it, I spread it to elsewhere, to other people, to other ventures. So, for example, for me, if an interview goes very well, I make sure everybody involved in any part of the production knows that, hey, this is the one. This is the one. I love all my other shows, but this is the one. Let's see where it goes. I let them know the message I got. The message I got comes from that division. I know that it's going to be successful. I've decided that I'm going to divide portions of this success amongst all the people around me. I want them to know that, if they're editing the sound or if they're fixing the video or Stacy, my wife, is doing any type of promotion for it. Part of the success, once we take the division out, is all of us together. But the division is your part. This is your part of the success. You watch the video, you listen to this, you listen to the audio, you made sure it was crisp, you made sure that it could go somewhere. So that division of success is basically, like I said, literally dividing up, taking a pie, for instance, cutting it in pieces. So how do you divide your success amongst people around you or your energy? How do you do that?
Gosh. I don't really have anyone like in my ballpark helping me in terms of this is what I need you to do for me. With the exception of my sister, she's also a writer. Her name's
Okay.
A.T. Balsara. Um, and she and I will call each other, we'll bounce things off each other. So often it's things more in terms of thematic materials or plot lines. We spent 2 weeks together in a car on a driving vacation just in October, and I told her the entire plots for books 2 and 3 of Fox Creek, and so she's, going back and forth with me on that. Um, so that would be it as far as that kind of division. Division in terms of my day, I have to divide my day in terms of time for writing, time for myself, time for promotion, which would include things like podcasts and so on.
Hmm.
But I'm also very gentle with myself. I wake up when I want to wake up and I quit when I want to quit. And I am not at all the way that I was during my 20 years of being a children's writer. I'm just kind to myself, and the results will be what they will be. Now, I will say that in terms of giving myself, um, like now to the listeners, in terms of what I have to say, to me that's abundance. And abundance, unless we're talking in physical terms, abundance isn't divided. Abundance in its very spiritual form just is always giving. It's always there. And so there is that well. And so that's what I draw on. If I'm not drawing on that, that's when I become fatigued. And that's when I feel like everybody's got a piece of me. So making sure that you're drawing from that well of abundance is how I can avoid that fatigue.
And I like that. Now, here goes a hard hitting question, and this is a tough one.
Okay.
All right. We all know the rising action, falling action, the climax, everything, and then the phoenix rising from the dust, right? We got all that
Yes.
scenario worked out. But after you go through that cycle, we've all done it, and nobody can say they haven't because it has happened to all of us. But now, in this day and age, what do you feel are the missing social elements that should be brought back from your literature?
A sense of community. Okay. I think we've lost that. Especially in the United States. I think our individualism, which has always been very fierce, it's how we, made the frontier and all that kind of stuff. It can sometimes go to the point where we withdraw from community, and it becomes about me as an individual rather than the community being equally or more important than me as an individual. So I think returning to a sense of community. They did have that sense of community in the South during that time. Granted, there was white community and there was black community, but nevertheless, there was community and there was a sense of upholding one another. So I think that's one thing. Um, I would say from the slave community, there would be that sense of for the people who had the courage to run, for that sense of power, that sense of I will do what it takes to have my freedom, to basically right a wrong, to create justice out of injustice, and I will do what it takes, even if I die. Um, the people who have put themselves on the line in Minnesota are people like that. They believe that they're fighting for justice. And that I believe is part of what we're missing today, but it's coming back. It's coming back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, a real quick thing that I like to do on the show is give a quick testimony. Me and you just met today. We had a real small pre-call before we even recorded. Actually, we probably recorded it during the pre-call. But here's the thing that I noticed about you. You're a person that you seek to make sure injustice doesn't happen to all or to any. And I appreciate that. I love the fact that you took a part of history that most people would obviously write you off. They'd be like, "What's a white woman doing talking about slavery in the South when she's from technically the North?" I mean, even though Washington State, and they would say that you're entitled, like you're just doing this because it's just something you want to get off your bucket list. But in reading your writing and hearing more about you and learning more about you and how personable you are, I don't see that. I don't get that. So I want to give you an amazing smile, and I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for writing and producing something that doesn't have to have a color connotation to it. It doesn't have to be defined. I'm a white lady writing about black slaves. Not here. I'm a person writing about an injustice.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a message that so clearly with the community and different things that you say, you know, your book, I believe, will help more in the lines of the civil unrest we're living in right now.
Yes.
Um, and I think at the end of the day that that's something that we need to go back to. That's something that we need to develop more, like you said, in the community. We need to have these talks. We need to talk about race relations and things that bother us. The slighted notes, the things that we slight, are what we should talk about. So I want to thank you for that. And then I want to thank you for another thing. Looking in the mirror and taking accountability and then deciding that you wanted to take responsibility because you didn't have to.
Mhm.
You could have took a swerve and went this way with it or that way, or you could have made the narrative however you wanted inside your story.
Mhm.
But you did it with a clear hit. You said, "Hey, I want someone to read this from a perspective that's not of their own. Next, I want them to do this next thing. The perspective that they're thinking of, I don't want them to even use that. I want them to think clearly. I want them to comprehend. Comprehension inside reading is something that has been lost over the last 15 years. And it's something that bothers me because people are speed readers, this and that. Everything's on a phone, which you can read your books on Kindle. I'm not taking that away from anybody. But the comprehension that is needed for what you have written will help some people's minds grow. And I know you don't want to take that much credit, but it really will because that kind of context is not out there in the world. So I want to tell you thank you for that. And then the one thing that we both can agree on is Romans 3, verse 23, for all have sinned to come short of the glory of God. You know that, I know that. The slave owners may not have known that,
Mhm.
but we know it for them. And
Mhm.
that's a purpose that, God has us here for. God has enabled and enlightened and moved your persuasion in that manner. Say thank you so much for that. When you wake up tomorrow and you got to get your hair done or whatever, look in the mirror and know that you are taking care of people. You are making people fall in love with themselves and others again because there's no one in history that's not taught by Glencoe, is not taught by any of these people that want to whitewash history.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you, Miss Torrey. And the last thing I want to do is I want to give the floor to you to give flowers to anyone that you haven't given flowers to that inspired you to do this. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for what you said, first of all. That's something I never hear. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. Um, Flowers to my father and to my mother for our dinner discussions, talking about the civil rights, and helping me to understand that what I was seeing on TV was injustice. Um, Flowers to MLK Jr. for having the courage to stand up and speak peaceably about a United States that could be united. And I still believe in that dream. I really do. Flowers to my husband for um, caring for me for all these years while I was writing and not necessarily putting much into that bank account. So, flowers to him. Um, let's see. And flowers to my grandmother June, who's in my heart and who loves me dearly and who's with me every moment of every day. So, thank you.
Okay. I think we're gonna give Grandma Jean a short story sometime. If you got time to do it, I think she would have. That would, you can personify her across the world.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I want to do for the audience, real quick, is a quick little reflection on. Here's the thing: our world has reverted, and I said reverted to a time where our media and all other sources are causing civil unrest. They're causing a divide. I've talked a lot about a division in this episode, but they want us to put a line between us. They want us to form a hatred, a thought pattern, even an idea that we are not equal.
Mhm.
And in this time and day, we have to accept the fact that there are conditions that hinder us, but we were all born, and that makes us equal there.
Mhm.
So through education, through getting rid of the sense of ignorance, this self-entitled ignorance,
Yes.
we can make the world a better place again. And that's something that I want people to think about. Not Black History Month and not White History, not Anglo-Saxon nor African. I want you all to really think this through. When we were kids and we were all playing together, no one knew a difference. When we sat at the lunch table in kindergarten, we were just so happy to know each other, to
Yes.
meet someone different. Let's bring back that attentiveness, that ecosystem we had at that time. So on that note, I am JR Sparrow, and she is Emmy Torrey, and we are
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Thank you very much.